The 6 Canadian military members killed in last week's helicopter crash were honored today at CFB Trenton. Family and friends gathered to pay their respects. The Prime Minister was also in attendance. Here are the fallen. Sub-Lieutenant Abbigail Cowbrough, a Marine Systems Engineering officer from Toronto. Captain Brenden MacDonald, a pilot from Nova Scotia. Captain Kevin Hagen, a pilot from British Columbia. Captain Maxime Miron-Morin, an Air Combat Systems officer from Quebec. Sub-Lieutenant Matthew Pyke, a naval warfare officer from Nova Scotia. And Master Corporal Matthew Cousins, an airborne electronic sensor operator from Guelph, Ontario. Here was the scene from the ceremony earlier today. The reason for the crash is still unknown, and an investigation is ongoing. While that investigation unfolds, the Canadian military's entire fleet of Cyclone helicopters remains on a, quote, operational pause. So what does that mean for the military's capabilities, and how soon should we expect answers for why this tragedy happened? Retired Vice Admiral Mark Norman previously served, of course, as Vice Chief of Defence Staff. He joins us from Ottawa. Hi, Vice Admiral Norman. Good to see you.
Good afternoon, Vashi.
Thanks very much for being with us. I have a lot of questions about the investigation, but I just want to first start off and ask you, as someone who's taken part in ceremonies like the one that so many Canadians watched today, what you took from it.
Well, I mean, it's heartbreaking to watch the family and friends of 6 young Canadians dealing with the grief of this tragic loss, this accident, and certainly my thoughts and prayers go out to everyone, including the ship's company of HMCS Fredericton and the broader maritime aviation and naval communities who are reeling with this tragic event. Yeah.
The event, of course, as we've mentioned, is still being investigated. There are a number of things that we were told last week were happening. For example, the data recorder, the cockpit voice recorder were being sent back to Canada to be analyzed. There was a flight safety team going out to take part in the investigation. Based on your experience, what can you tell us about what might be happening behind the scenes right now where that investigation is concerned?
Well, the flight safety team, they're experts in this type of activity. They really are leaders in their community. They'll be gathering a lot of evidence, everything from eyewitness testimony that we've heard in recent reports is actually available. They'll be gathering a lot of documentary evidence on board the ship and elsewhere with respect to pre-flight planning, any information that can be downloaded from the ship's combat systems, perhaps even from other ships that were in the vicinity. And of course, the key item will be the data recovered, hopefully, from the data recorder. And we can't forget that there will still be efforts, I'm sure they're ongoing now, to figure out what they may or may not be able to do with respect to actually recovering the aircraft itself.
And when it comes to what we've heard so far is that that's a big challenge, right? Because of the sort of scale of the size of the debris field. When it comes to the cockpit recorder, the flight data recorder versus debris versus parts of the helicopter, what is the difference in kind of information you can get from that stuff?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert in aircraft accident reconstruction, but in simple terms, the data recorder and voice recorder will give you, as they indicate, recordings of what was being discussed on the intercom, perhaps external radio of the aircraft itself. The data recorder will give you whatever data is available from the onboard avionics systems. And I think that will be a real key element of this. And of course, anything that you can recover with respect to physical the structure of the aircraft and then the mechanical components will give you an indication if there is an indication of some sort of more mechanical fault as opposed to some sort of electronic or avionic system control fault.
You referenced some reporting this week, some of which came from my colleague Mary Brewster, about the fact that we now know there were witnesses to what happened. And I'm wondering, I have two questions for you on that, Vice Admiral. The first, as far as the investigation goes, might that be of some significant help, that there are witnesses to what happened? But also, as someone who spent so many years among your colleagues, how difficult might that be for people who had the misfortune of witnessing that?
Yeah, so I'll answer your second question first, and I can only imagine what it was like for the shipmates to have watched the aircraft crash. It's something that they will probably never get over. And, there would have been a wide range of people. You need to understand that there's not only a formal disciplined procedure associated with the recovery of an aircraft, but often there's other people prior to the recovery who are able to watch the aircraft. There's a great sense of pride. Ship's company loved the aircraft. It's an extension of the ship, and of course we don't know exactly who was where at the time, but those who did see it will be I'm sure, deeply affected by what they saw. They'll never unsee it. As it relates to the information that might be available, I think it will be very important, especially those who are associated with the air detachment. Understand that some of the formal positions at flying stations in the ship are staffed by the other crew, and so they will have not only their own observation as to what happened, but they may or may not be able to interpret some of that from the perspective of being qualified aircrew on the same aircraft themselves.
What about, Vice Admiral, the fleet of Cyclones? My understanding was, and we saw Chief of Defense Staff Vance talk about this last week, that it was being put on operational pause. What exactly does that mean in layman's terms, I guess, and what would the bar be for lifting that pause?
Yeah, so in layman's terms, it means that they're not going to fly the aircraft until they have a better sense of what may or may not have happened, and that the crews who are qualified to fly the aircraft, the remainder of the fleet, are comfortable that any questions that they may have about what may or may not have happened have been answered to their satisfaction. And plus, you've got a morale and emotional component to this as well. I mean, Shearwater, the home of maritime aviation in Canada, is a very small, tight community. That they'll be reeling. These are friends that they've lost, and so it's entirely appropriate and prudent that they've put in place this operational pause. As to how long this will take, honestly, I don't think your viewers should be looking at specific timelines per se. I think this will be conditions-based, and the types of things that will be able to inform a decision as to whether to resume flying or not will be what sort of preliminary indications the investigative team get from the data recorders, the voice recorders, and those eyewitness testimonies and other potential pieces of evidence that they're gathering now.
All right, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time, but I really appreciate your time and your insights this evening, Vice Admiral Norman. Pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Vashti.
Retired Vice Admiral Mark Norman. Hi, I'm Vashti Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.